Hello and welcome to CodeSure, a place to learn about medical coding and billing. Today, we're going to take a look at Chapter 2 of the ICD-CM Codebook. This covers neoplasms. A neoplasm is an abnormal growth of cells in the body, also described as a tumor. A neoplasm can be a small growth, such as a mole, or a cancerous or precancerous tumor. These are all found in Chapter 2 of our codebook. Let's take a look at how the ICD10 Browser Tool works with the Neoplasm Table. Let's get started. Let's take a quick look at what the ICD10 CM Codebook is all about, who publishes it, and how that relates to the CDC. You may see some of these questions on your certification exam. The ICD-10 Codebook is updated each year by the World Health Organization. The American Medical Association publishes the ICD-10 CM in the United States. This is used by all healthcare providers in all settings to assign or interpret diagnoses, both diagnoses, primary and secondary. The clinical modification, and that's the CM of the ICD-10 CM. CM stands for the clinical modifications. These were developed by the National Center for Health Statistics, which is a division of the CDC. It's the CDC that publishes the browser tool that we are using today. This browser tool serves as an index to all the tables of the ICD-10 CM, including the Neoplasm Table, which we'll be reviewing today. The ICD-10 CM tables are listed here for your review. You can see the table of neoplasms found in the codebook, but we will access that table with the CDC Browser Tool and refer to the codebook for guidance. All the tables can be accessed through the Browser Tool. That includes the list of diseases and injuries, external causes of injuries, table of neoplasms, and the table of drugs and chemicals. Here, you can see the table of neoplasms located on the ICD-10 CM Browser Tool. It's under the second search field. The circle with the number following the title indicates the number of returns found related to your chosen search. It's possible to have returns in each table, but today we'll be looking for returns in the table of neoplasms. ICD-10 formatting can include 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 7 characters. These characters are divided into categories. A category has 3 numbers. It begins with an alpha, or an alphabet letter, and it's followed by 2 numbers. Then you will find a dot or a decimal, and your subcategory. Your subcategory represents the etiology, anatomical site, or the severity of the injury or disease. For some codes, a 7th character or an extension is used. When you have an extension or a 7th character, you must use an X if you have a subcategory with fewer than 3 numbers. I think of this as informing the computer. Computers cannot deal with blanks, so we use an X. There was a judge in the state of Arkansas who did not have a middle name. He became known as Paul X because he put an X in the blank that required his name, and from that time forward he was known as Paul X Williams. That's what we're doing. We're putting an X in the blank. Let's look at the organized contents of the ICD-10 CM table of neoplasms. As you can see, all codes begin with either the letter C or D and are followed by 2 additional digits. Chapter 2 covers neoplasms. The codes range from C00 to D48. Neoplasms are classified primarily by site, with broad groupings for behavior, malignant, in situ, or benign. All neoplasms are classified, whether they are functionally active or not, and you may be required to use an additional code from Chapter 4. This will identify the functional activity associated with the neoplasm you are coding. Whether you're using the ICD-10 CM codebook or you're using the CDC Browser Tool, you're going to have to search the medical record and determine whether the neoplasm is benign, in situ, malignant, or of uncertain histological behavior. It's helpful to go ahead and look at the code book and review the columns available for identifying neoplasms. The tables found in the codebook for neoplasms contain a column for each morphological variety listed. We will cover this in greater detail when we use the codebook for reporting, but it's identified here with the arrow pointing to the columns. We will review these columns more closely in the next slide. I've rotated the page so we can read the column titles more easily. You can see malignant primary, malignant secondary, in situ, benign, uncertain, unspecified behavior. This will help you when you're searching for the proper neoplasm code. Let's do a top-down overview of neoplasms or tumors. Benign tumors grow slowly. They're encapsulated and non-invasive. They're well differentiated and they're non-metastatic. But with malignant tumors, you'll have a tumor that is rapidly multiplying, invasive and infiltrative, anaplastic and undifferentiated, and metastatic. Tumor grade is a description of a tumor based on how abnormal the tumor cells and the tumor tissue look under a microscope. This is an indicator of how quickly a tumor is likely to grow and spread. There are grades 1 through 4. In grade 1, cells are slightly abnormal and well differentiated. In grade 2, cells are more abnormal and moderately differentiated. In grade 3, cells are very abnormal and poorly differentiated. In grade 4, cells are immature and undifferentiated. These are the instructions for using the Alphabetic Index in the ICD10 codebook. However, we are using the CDC Browser Tool. This browser tool functions precisely as the Alphabetic Index for the Neoplasm Table. It's important, however, to understand how to use the codebook. The good news is the codebook is filled with instructions, and these come directly from the codebook. In this class, we will cover how to code neoplasms in several different lessons. Today, we're just going to initially touch on coding for neoplasms. A primary malignant neoplasm that overlaps 2 or more contiguous sites, those are sites that are next to each other, should be classified in the subcategory code .8. This represents an overlapping lesion, unless the combination is specifically indexed elsewhere. As we begin to look at codes with the browser tool, we will review the notes that are associated with specific neoplasms. For multiple neoplasms of the same site that are not contiguous, such as tumors in different quadrants of the same breast, codes for each site should be assigned. That means you can have several codes for breast tumors. When coding for a neoplasm, if the treatment is directed at the malignancy, designate the malignancy as the principal diagnosis. There is an exception to this guideline. If a patient admission is for the administration of chemotherapy, immunotherapy, or external beam radiation therapy, assign the appropriate Z51 code as the first listed or the principal diagnosis, and the diagnosis or problem for which the service is being performed will be your secondary diagnosis. When a patient is admitted because of a primary neoplasm with metastasis and treatment is directed toward the secondary site only, the secondary neoplasm is designated as the principal diagnosis, even though the primary malignancy is still present. While we will not get into this depth in coding today, these are the type questions that you can anticipate you will see on any certification exam. So we will go over this multiple times, and you will be familiar with these guidelines before we complete this course. Listed here are the table of contents of the Chapter 2 Neoplasms. Since we're using the CDC Browser Tool, we don't really see the table of contents initially, so I thought it would be helpful for you to understand how the codes are divided by topic before we move forward finding our codes with the CDC Browser Tool. It seems like it's been a long time getting here, ready to search the CDC Browser Tool, but there you see the table of neoplasms at the bottom of your slide. It's located under the code field for the tabular list of diseases. Anytime we find a code that is relevant and supplies a return, the number of returns will appear in the gray circle. You can actually have codes at every one of those gray circles. But let's begin and find our first code. Let's search for a benign adrenal gland neoplasm. Enter the term adrenal gland, ADRENALGLAND, and you'll see 97 codes return in the index to diseases, but there are 3 in the table of neoplasms. That's quite narrow. Let's see if one of those is benign. Place your cursor over the table of neoplasms. Let's link to them and see what we have. We've been linked to our 3 returns. There's the benign column, and there's the neoplasm, neoplastic adrenal gland. That's our code, D36.0. Let's do a quick double check with the ICD10 CM codebook. There we are, adrenal gland, benign, D35.0. The returns are the same, but I thought it'd be interesting to see how the code looks in the codebook. Let's search a very common term, breast cancer. You'll see the table of neoplasms returns 0, but there are 2 returns to the index of diseases and injuries. It tells us to link to neoplasm, breast, malignant. So that's what we'll do. Let's see what that returns. This links us to our C50 codes. That's familiar because we know C50 or C codes are all part of the neoplasm table. Malignant neoplasm of unspecified site of right female breast. That sounds like the proper code. Let's learn more about it. Let's compare our CDC Browser Tool return with the returns from the code manual. And there we have breast, malignant primary, C50 code. So that's how your codes look in the code manual as compared to how they appear with the CDC Browser Tool return. Today we used the CDC Browser Tool and reviewed the table of neoplasms. Join me in the next lesson when we review the table of neoplasms in greater detail and we use the ICD-10 code manual in addition to the browser tool. They are good combinations. Thanks again. Bye-bye.